So we have one, which is the traditional and contribution. Leah, you can chime in too, and you can unmute yourself. But if you don't want to unmute yourself, you can always do by chat. I have three monitors up here, so I'm keeping the chat in a separate monitor. So we have this one, which is the traditional and contribution income statement. We have this one with the plant-wide and the departmental overhead rates. I think you and I went through that, Danielle, if I'm correct.
Yeah, yeah. I think
So there's that one was
the
the
5 and
plant-wide.
6 are the ones that
5 and 6.
am having
Okay,
trouble
good.
getting done.
Okay, so
Yep.
I wanted to. Oh, this one's tough. 5.
Yeah, can we do that?
Sure. Sure.
Number 5 and number 6, please.
Yeah, no problem.
All right.
Okay, Superior Company provided the following data for the year ended December 31st. So we have our selling expenses, purchases of raw materials, direct labor, administrative, manufacturing overhead applied to work in process, actual manufacturing overhead. Then we're given all sorts of beginning and ending inventories with a couple of question marks and a couple of extra information. Total manufacturing costs added to production for the year were $683,000. Cost of goods available for sale totaled $740,000. The unadjusted cost of goods sold totaled $660,000, and the net operating income was $30,000. The company's under or over applied overhead is close to cost of goods sold. So it's telling us to do cost of goods manufactured and cost of goods sold in an income statement. And the hint is prepare the income statement first, then the cost of goods sold schedule, statement and schedule of cost of goods sold first, followed by the schedule of cost of goods manufactured. So as I've said many times, a very wise man once told me that when faced with a problem, fill it in with words first and then start putting the numbers against the words. So if we're going to do an income statement, it's going to start off with sales. We have cost of goods sold, which is going to be your adjusted cost of goods sold, which will then come down to our gross profit, which your book incorrectly calls gross margin, which annoys me every time I see it, but I have to get over it. Now, when we subtract all of our selling and administrative expenses, it says that we have selling expenses and we have administrative expenses. So our selling and administrative expenses are going to be our selling expenses and our administrative expenses. I thought there was something that goes here, but I think it's blank. But that will be the total expenses, and that is going to come down to our net operating income. So let's start filling in all of the information that we're given and try to work through what we're not given. So notice over here, we're told that the net operating income is $30,000. So I already know that my net operating income has to come down to $30,000. Right? That was given in the problem right there. Now, when I go up, notice that I'm also given my selling expenses and my administrative expenses. Both of those are given, right? So my selling expenses are given at 140. My administrative expenses are given at 100. So I'm going to put in my 140 and my 100. So now I can calculate my gross margin, because the only thing that comes under selling and administrative expenses is selling and administrative. They just gave you the couple extra lines to confuse you over there in case you mistook something, right? So if we know that our total selling and administrative expenses are 240 and our net operating income is 30,000, then by math, and let me know if I'm going too fast, that number would have to be 270,000, right? Because 270,000, if I subtract the 240, right, then I would come down to that 30,000. So right now, I know that my gross margin is going to be 270,000. So if I can figure out either the sales or the cost of goods sold, I automatically know the other number.
Oh my God, yes.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Right?
I know.
What I was doing, I was going on top, going to the bottom. And I was like, how does this all just go? But you went to the bottom
So,
all the way to the
yeah,
up.
as I told
Yeah.
you, Leah, it was my old math coach, and he was very wise. He told me that when faced with a very, very complex problem, write it down in words first, and then find the pieces in the problem, right, that relate to the words. So if you try to solve a complex problem without the words, you will never be able to solve it. But once you get the words down, it helps you to know what you're looking for. So
Yep.
now
Yeah.
I'm either going to be looking for one or the other, and I believe I have the information for cost of goods sold. But again, once I know one of these numbers, since I know the gross margin, I'm automatically going to know the other one. But remember, this is going to be the adjusted cost of goods sold, not the unadjusted cost of goods sold. So I'm going to scroll back to the information. I would also highly recommend using screenshots to avoid the scrolling back and forth or printing things out when you're working with the homework problem. So we've got those information put in. Now I'm going to look for information relating to cost of goods sold because I'm pretty sure that I remember that sales were not given. So we're given selling expenses, purchases of raw materials, direct labor is a question mark. We have our administrative, we have our manufacturing overhead applied to work in process, actual manufacturing overhead cost, beginning and ending inventories. Now, I'm going to look at this number right over here. The unadjusted cost of goods sold totaled $660,000. Now, if we start off with the unadjusted cost of goods sold, then we either add or subtract the under or over applied overhead,
Oh my God.
to come down to our adjusted cost of goods sold. So I'm going to start off with my 660,000. Then I have my information right over here. So my manufacturing overhead applied to work in process is 285,000. The actual is 70,000. So we have a $15,000 difference between those two numbers. So we
Wait, can you show
either
me that again?
see, we have over here the manufacturing overhead applied to work in process, and I have the actual manufacturing overhead. The difference between those two numbers is your over or under applied overhead. So if I take 285,000 and subtract 270,000, I wind up with $15,000 of under or over applied overhead. So what that means is I'm either going to add or subtract 15,000 to the 660,000 to come to my adjusted cost of goods sold. So now I have to decide whether it's over applied or under applied. Sorry, I have a very excitable dog. Since the applied overhead is greater or over the actual, that means we over applied the overhead and we overestimated the cost of goods sold. So that means that we're going to have to subtract 15,000 from the 660,000, and our adjusted cost of goods sold is going to be 645,000.
You have to subtract.
Okay, you should have gone over the over and under applied overhead. I think it was in chapter 2 when we talked, because chapter 2 was, it had two things in there, was the job order costing, and then at the end it goes into the over or under applied overhead. But you take the difference between your actual overhead and your applied overhead, and that gets adjusted to cost of goods sold. So I'm going to stick in my 645,000 cost of goods sold. So now I can figure out my sales, because remember, this number has to add to 270,000, right? Because this number, right, is 30,000. Our total selling and administrative expenses are 240, right? So 270 minus 240 is going to give us 30,000. So we want this number to be 270,000. So X minus 6, actually that violates what my old math coach said. Sales minus 645,000 equals 270,000. So therefore sales equals 645,000 plus 270. What is that, 915,000? I'll find out in a second because it's going to do the calculation. So notice if I put 915,000 in there, I come down to a gross margin of 270. I subtract the 240,000 of selling and administrative expenses, and I come down to my 30,000 net operating income.
Wow. That's
I
amazing.
know.
Did that work?
Yes, it really did.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
So once again, you're given the net operating income, you're given that number, so put it in. You're given these two numbers, so you know this number, right? You're kind of almost given cost of goods sold. You just have to do the adjustment. And once you do that, just work up to sales.
Yep. That's so
Okay?
amazing. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're
If
going to
it
go.
was under applied overhead, then we would add the 15,000, right?
Correct.
Okay.
All right.
Correct. Because cost of goods sold is an expense, right? So if it's over applied, what it means is that you overestimated the expense, you applied too much overhead, so you have to pull some back to correct it. If it's under applied, that means that your guess was too little. So if your guess was too little to correct it, you have to add more,
Okay.
All right.
if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Okay, so now we're going to use some of these numbers in the next schedule along with the given information. So we're going to move on to the next schedule. And once again, we're going to thank Mr. Kessler, because he's the one who told me about this trick of getting the words in first and then looking through the problem for the numbers instead of starting with the numbers and trying to work with them. It really makes things a heck of a lot easier. So now I'm going to go into my schedule of cost of goods sold. So if we know our schedule of cost of goods sold, we're going to start off with our beginning finished goods inventory. To our beginning finished inventory, we're going to add the cost of goods manufactured. I think there's a subtotal in there, if I remember correctly. If we start off with the beginning finished goods inventory, we add the cost of goods manufactured. That is the cost of goods available for sale. I knew there was a subtotal in there. From the cost of goods available for sale, we subtract out the ending finished goods inventory. And that brings us down to our cost of goods sold, but they want us to bring it down to the adjusted cost of goods sold. So then we have to add the over or under applied overhead. So that brings us down to that unadjusted cost of goods sold. Then we adjust it by the over or under applied overhead. Let me go back up for a second. Applied is over, so it's over applied overhead. So I had to subtract the over applied overhead. So less over applied overhead brings us down to adjusted cost of goods sold. So unadjusted cost of goods sold was given in the problem, right? Unadjusted cost of goods sold was $660,000. From the income statement, we know the adjusted cost of goods sold was $645,000. And we know that we had to subtract the $15,000. I think with the less it knows to subtract it. I don't think you have to enter it in as a negative number, but it wouldn't hurt to put in the negative $15,000 to make sure it subtracts it. So we already knew those three numbers from the given information and the last problem. Now let's start to fill in everything that we know. So over here, we're given the beginning finished goods inventory, but we're not given the ending finished goods inventory. So our beginning finished goods inventory is 50,000. Now we're going to add our cost of goods manufactured. So we have manufacturing costs added to production. That's not cost of goods manufactured, but they do give us the cost of goods available for sale. Notice that's here, 740,000. So this number we don't know, cost of goods manufactured, and ending finished goods inventory is a question mark. But we do know that 50 plus X has to equal 740, right? And 740 minus X would equal 660,000, because beginning finished goods inventory plus cost of goods manufactured equals cost of goods available for sale, and cost of goods available for sale less the ending finished goods inventory equals the unadjusted cost of goods sold. So we have enough information now to fill out this number and this number. So 50,000 plus cost of goods manufactured equals 740,000. So our cost of goods manufactured would equal 740,000 minus 50,000 would equal 690,000. Now it's annoying to keep turning off and on the writing, so I'll do the second one. So for the second one, we know that cost of goods available for sale less ending finished goods inventory equals the unadjusted cost of goods sold. So 740,000 minus the finished goods equals 660,000. So if I rearrange the terms, finished goods, whoop, that's not a G. There we go. Finished goods equals 740,000 minus 660,000. I'm pretty sure that's 80,000. So I'll fill in those two numbers and let's see if I'm right. So 690,000 would be cost of goods manufactured, and that works, right? 50 plus 690 equals 740. And then 740 minus 80,000 should equal the 660,000. Oh, oh, it was over applied. That's why I just picked the wrong one. It was over applied overhead. So it's less over applied overhead. I just chose the wrong title. There we go. So did I go too fast through that?
No, that was good.
Okay, so again, right, I filled in all the words. I put in all the numbers that I knew from the first part or that were given. And in this case, the only two numbers that weren't given were the subtotals, right? So they were relatively easy for me to figure those out.
Yes.
Okay. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing with the cost of goods manufactured. So I'm going to put in all the words for the cost of goods manufactured schedule, and then I'm going to look through the problem and also this part, right, for any numbers that I already know. And hopefully, as Mr. Kessler told me, if you put the words in and fill in the numbers that you know, usually what you need to figure out becomes pretty obvious. That's at least what he told me. He was a very, very wise man.
It's like solving a puzzle.
It is, yeah.
Once you have like everything, now you just gotta solve what's left.
Yep, this problem is actually a very, very big puzzle. So if we go through the schedule of cost of goods manufactured, they should have an example in your book. You start off with your beginning work in process inventory. Then you have to add your direct materials. So you have to figure out the direct materials used in production. So to do that, you start off with your beginning inventory of raw materials. You add your purchases of raw materials, and that gives you your raw materials available. From your raw materials available, you subtract your ending raw materials inventory. I'm making sure that I'm doing the words right this time. And you come down to your direct materials used in production. Now to your beginning work in process. This is the room 2, the work in process, where all the processing is done. So you add your materials used in production, you add your direct labor, and you add your overhead applied. So manufacturing overhead applied to work in process. When you take your raw materials used in production, your direct materials used in production, your direct labor, and your manufacturing overhead applied to work in process, that adds to the total manufacturing costs added to production. When you add that number to beginning work in process, you get total manufacturing cost to account for. Then all we have to do is subtract out the ending work in process inventory. So I'm making sure that I'm doing the correct one this time. We subtract out the ending work in process inventory to come down to the cost of goods manufactured. So now that I've done all that, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to look through the last schedule. The last schedule should come down to cost of goods manufactured. And I'm going to look through the problem for any numbers that I know and then start to fill in the numbers that I don't know. So first, from the last schedule, there's my cost of goods manufactured right there. So I figured out my cost of goods manufactured, $690,000. So notice that's the bottom line figure, $690,000, because there's only one cost of goods manufactured for the period. Now I'm going to look at my inventory. Work in process, I don't know my beginning inventory, but I do know my ending inventory is 35,000, and it's subtracted, so I'm going to put the negative 35,000 here. I think the computer accepts it as a positive number. As long as you do the less, it knows to subtract it, but on the exam I would make sure that putting it in as a negative number. Okay? So I was just given my ending work in process inventory. Now I need my direct materials inventory. So my raw materials inventory beginning is 40 and ending is 10. And I subtract the ending, so negative 10. Those were given in the problem, right there. There's raw materials inventory beginning 40,000 and ending 10,000. Now notice I'm also given purchases of raw materials, right? 290,000. So 290,000 purchases of raw materials. So total raw materials available should be 330,000. So if I take 330,000 and subtract 10,000, direct materials used in production should be 320,000. Did I go too fast through that? Leah, Danielle, did I go
Yes.
too fast through that?
Sorry, my computer was freezing.
Oh, okay. Did I go too fast through that?
Oh no, you're doing really good right now.
Doing
I'm
good?
following along.
Okay,
Yes.
Doing good.
Danielle, you following okay?
Yes.
Okay, so we've got the direct materials used in production. So now I'm going to go back. Direct labor is unknown, but I do know manufacturing overhead applied to work in process, 285,000. So 285,000. I think I put an extra zero. Manufacturing overhead applied to work in process. So that number is given. Now I'm going to go over here. Total manufacturing costs added to production for the year, $683,000. I think that's the last number I need. So notice total manufacturing costs added to production, right? Total manufacturing costs added to production, $683,000. So now I think I have everything I need because the only thing I'm missing now is direct labor and the beginning work in process inventory. Okay, we're good? Now, total manufacturing costs added to production are the direct materials used, direct labor, and applied overhead. Again, the three of them, the definition adds to manufacturing costs added to production. So I know the 320,000 direct materials used in production. I don't know the direct labor, but I was given the overhead applied. And I know that the total of the three is 683,000. So,
Oh.
right? So 683,000. Subtract the 320,000 and subtract 285,000
And then that's
should give you the direct labor. So bringing up my calculator, if I take 683,000, I subtract 320,000, and I subtract 285,000, I come down to 78,000. So I believe that my direct labor is going to be 78,000. That was the number I got, right? Think so. So I started off pretty early this morning, and I'm not a morning person. Yes, it was 78,000. So 78,000 goes in the direct labor. Now, as you can see, the only number that I don't know is beginning work in process. So the last formula that I need, can I erase all of these now?
Yeah.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
So the last formula that I need is beginning work in process, add manufacturing costs added to production, subtract out the ending work in process, and that's going to equal cost of goods manufactured. So notice beginning work in process plus manufacturing costs added equals the total manufacturing cost to account for. So basically, if I take this number and subtract that number, it's supposed to come down to that number. But I don't know my beginning work in process. But I do know that my manufacturing costs added to production are $683,000. My ending work in process is $35,000. And my cost of goods manufactured is $690,000. So writing that out, beginning work in process plus 683,000 minus 35,000 equals 690,000. That looks like a Z instead of an equal, sorry. It's not that easy to write with this thing. So beginning work in process would have to equal 690,000, add 35,000, and subtract 683,000 just by algebra. So if I do that in my calculator, if I take 690,000, add 35,000, and subtract 683,000, I come down to 42,000 as beginning work in process inventory. And now let's see if I know what I'm talking about. Boom.
That was amazing.
I know, right?
You do it so flawlessly.
Thank you.
And I get it
You
too.
can thank Mr. Kessler for that.
Mr.
Because
Kessler.
again, notice, right, I had a method to my madness. I'm
Yeah.
not crazy, right, going through the problem, trying to work through the schedules. Write everything down in words, right? And then
Yep.
go through the problem and figure out which numbers are given to you. And then, as I said, what isn't given to you, what you have to figure out becomes relatively obvious from that. Danielle, did you have a question on that? Looks like you're a little confused.
No, I'm all like, answer is complete incorrect.
Isn't that nice? I like that.
It really is.
I like that too. I've got the same thing. So you said 6 is another one you need to do?
Yes.
Yeah, because I have a meeting tonight at 6, so I'm probably going to have to cut it off around 4:30 or so at the latest. So I possibly can go a little later, but that would depress my dog. He wouldn't get a walk.
Aww.
Don't worry.